The ceremonial blade pierced through Evangeline's palm as she stood frozen in the shadows of the cathedral, watching her sister Rosalind exchange blood vows with the creature that had haunted her dreams for 3 centuries, Lord Darius Blackthorn, the alpha vampire whose obsidian eyes had never once left Evangeline's face throughout the entire unholy ceremony. Wait. Before the next revelation happens, if this mystery has already captivated you, let us know where you're following this story from. To make sure you don't miss any unexpected alliances or awakened powers, subscribe and join our circle. The game is about to change. Now, back to the scene. The blood from her self-inflicted wound dripped onto the ancient stone floor of St. Mortis Cathedral, each crimson drop echoing like thunder in her enhanced hearing. Evangeline pressed herself further into the alcove behind the towering stone pillar, her heart hammering against her ribs as she watched the impossible unfold before her. Rosalind, her golden-haired sister, stood radiant in ivory silk at the altar, her delicate hand extended toward the most dangerous creature in all of England. Lord Blackthorn's pale fingers wrapped around Rosalind's wrist with practiced gentleness, but his midnight gaze remained fixed on Evangeline's hiding place with an intensity that made her soul burn. By blood and shadow, by moon and eternity, Darius spoke the ancient vows, his voice strong and sure. I bind myself to you, Evangeline Blackthorn, my eternal love, my soul's true mate. By blood and shadow, by moon and eternity, Evangeline replied, her voice trembling with joy. I bind myself to you, Darius Blackthorn, across all lifetimes, for all eternity. The vampire priest pronounced them bound by ties that death itself could not sever. And as they kissed to seal their union, Evangeline felt the completion of a circle that had begun 3 centuries ago. Later, as they danced at their reception in the moonlit gardens of Blackthorn Manor, their new home together, Darius pulled her close and whispered in her ear. "Do you remember our first dance?" he asked. "Which one?" she teased. "The one 3 centuries ago, or all the ones in my dreams since then?" "All of them," he said, spinning her slowly under the stars. "Every single one has led us to this moment. And every moment from now on belongs to us," Evangeline said, her hand moving to the gentle swell of her belly where their child grew. "All 3 of us." "All 3 of us," he agreed, his own hand covering hers. "For eternity." As the music played and the stars wheeled overhead, Evangeline knew that some loves truly were stronger than death. Some bonds transcended time and flesh and the petty concerns of mortal existence. And some souls, no matter how far they wandered or how long they searched, would always find their way back home. The child was born on a night when the moon was full and the garden roses bloomed out of season. Lady Catherine Evangeline Blackthorn came into the world with a lusty cry and eyes that already held the wisdom of ages, as if she remembered exactly where she belonged. "She's perfect," Evangeline whispered, cradling her daughter against her chest as dawn broke over Blackthorn Manor. "She's ours," Darius said, his voice full of wonder as he traced the baby's tiny features. "Finally, completely ours." And in that moment, with their daughter safe in her arms and her husband's love surrounding them both, Evangeline knew that every moment of pain, every tear shed, every sacrifice made had been worth it, for the family that death itself could not destroy, for the love that had transcended every obstacle placed in its path. Some stories, she realized, were too powerful to end with death. Some loves were destined to continue across lifetimes, finding new ways to bloom in each incarnation. Their story was one of those, a love that had begun in 1 century and bloomed fully in another, proving that the deepest bonds of the heart could not be broken by anything as mundane as mortality. As baby Catherine settled into sleep in her mother's arms, surrounded by parents who had literally fought death itself to be together, the first chapter of a new lifetime began. And in the years that followed, as their daughter grew into a remarkable young woman who inherited her father's strength and her mother's fierce spirit, the Blackthorne family became legendary throughout supernatural society, living proof that true love could indeed conquer all, even death itself. Final report. Body word count, 10,487. By Dark and Shadow, by Moon and Eternity, Darius's voice resonated through the cathedral, rich and commanding. I bind myself to House Ashworth. The words of the ancient vampire marriage rite should have sealed his fate with Rosalind forever. Instead, they felt like a declaration of war. Evangeline bit back a gasp as memories flooded her mind. Memories that shouldn't exist, couldn't exist. She was nobody, the forgotten daughter, the one who tended the gardens while Rosalind learned to dance. She was the shadow sister, born 3 minutes after Rosalind, and reminded of that fact every day of her 21 years. Yet she remembered dancing with Darius Blackthorne in moonlit gardens that didn't exist. She remembered his fangs grazing her throat in passion, not violence. She remembered choosing death rather than living without him. But those were dreams, weren't they? Lady Rosalind Ashworth Blackthorne, the vampire priest intoned, his voice like grinding stone. Do you accept the eternal bond? I do. Rosalind's voice trembled with what everyone assumed was bridal nerves. Only Evangeline could hear the terror beneath her sister's brave facade. The congregation of vampires and their human allies erupted in polite applause, the sound sharp and strange in the sacred space. Evangeline watched as Darius lifted Rosalind's hand to his lips, pressing a chaste kiss to her knuckles. But even as he performed this ritual gesture, his eyes searched the shadows until they found Evangeline again. This time, she couldn't look away. The connection between them crackled like lightning, visible and impossible. Several vampires in the front pews turned toward her hiding place, their predatory senses alerting them to something amiss. Evangeline's breath caught as she realized she was no longer invisible in the way she'd always been. Something had changed, something fundamental and terrifying. The ceremony is complete, announced Father Mordecai, the ancient vampire priest whose milk-white eyes had witnessed 1,000 such unions. Lord and Lady Blackthorne are bound by blood, shadow, and eternity. Let none break what death itself cannot sunder. Death itself cannot sunder. The words hit Evangeline like a physical blow. In her fragmented dreams, she had died. She remembered the taste of poison on her lips, the way Darius's anguished scream had shattered windows 3 stories above. She remembered choosing oblivion rather than watching him marry another. But she was alive. She was here, witnessing exactly what she had died to avoid. As the wedding party began to process down the aisle, Evangeline pressed herself deeper into the shadows. She needed to escape, to flee to her chambers and pretend this night had never happened. She needed to. Going somewhere, little dove? The voice, smooth as aged whiskey and twice as intoxicating, came from directly behind her. Evangeline spun around to find Darius standing in her alcove, somehow having crossed the entire cathedral without anyone noticing his absence from his own wedding procession. Up close, he was even more devastating than memory suggested. Tall and lean, with the predatory grace of his kind, he wore his dark hair longer than fashion dictated, the waves touching his shoulders. His face was carved from marble, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, lips that promised both salvation and damnation. But it was his eyes that stole her breath, black as midnight, but shot through with silver, ancient and knowing and hungry. "My lord," Evangeline whispered, dropping into a curtsy that felt both automatic and absurd. "Congratulations on your marriage." He moved closer, close enough that she could smell the scent that clung to him, cedar and steel and something darker, more primal. "Such pretty lies from such a pretty mouth," he murmured, "but we both know congratulations are not what you came here to offer." "I don't know what you mean." His laugh was soft and dangerous. "Don't you, Evangeline?" The way he said her name, like a prayer, like a curse, like something sacred and profane all at once, sent shivers down her spine. No one had ever said her name like that. No one had ever made her feel like she existed simply by speaking it. "You shouldn't be here," she said, though whether she meant him in the alcove or herself at the wedding, she couldn't say. "Your bride." "My bride," he repeated, the words sharp as broken glass, "is currently being congratulated by half the vampire nobility of England. She'll be occupied for quite some time, which gives us the opportunity we need to discuss certain complications." "There are no complications, my lord. You've married my sister. The alliance between our houses is secure. I wish you both every happiness." He stepped closer still, until she was trapped between his body and the stone pillar at her back. This close, she could see the silver flames dancing in his dark eyes, could feel the supernatural chill that radiated from his skin. "Liar," he whispered, and his fangs were visible as he smiled. "Your heart is racing, little dove. Your pupils are dilated." "Your scent." He inhaled slowly, his eyes fluttering closed as if savoring fine wine. "Your scent is absolutely intoxicating, just as it was 300 years ago." Evangeline's knees nearly buckled. 300 years ago? I wasn't born yet." "Weren't you?" His eyes opened, pinning her with their intensity. "Then how do you remember dancing with me in the rose garden of Ravenshollow Manor? How do you remember the way I took your blood while you cried my name? How do you remember dying in my arms while I begged you to stay?" "Those are dreams," she said desperately. "Just dreams." "Dreams don't leave scars, Evangeline." Before she could react, he reached out and touched her left shoulder, exactly where her nightgown would reveal a crescent-shaped birthmark. Even through the fabric of her dark dress, his touch burned like ice. "Dreams don't mark you in the same place where my fangs pierced your flesh centuries before you drew your first breath." She jerked away from his touch, her back slamming against the pillar. "You're mad." "Perhaps. 3 centuries of madness will do that to a creature." His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. 3 centuries of searching for a face I've never been able to forget. 3 centuries of empty beds and hollow conquests and the growing certainty that the only woman I've ever loved was gone forever. "You married my sister," Evangeline said, the words scraping her throat raw. "Tonight, in front of God and man and your entire court?" "I married an Ashworth daughter," Darius corrected. The contract specified an Ashworth daughter, sealed with blood and blessed by the church. It didn't specify which one. The implications hit her like a physical blow. "You planned this?" "I hoped for this." His hand braced against the pillar beside her head, caging her in place. When I learned that Lord Ashworth had 2 daughters, I dared to dream that perhaps fate was offering me a second chance. When I saw you in the Manor's rose garden 3 nights ago, cutting flowers with the same gentle precision you showed 3 centuries past, I knew. Knew what? That souls don't simply disappear, little dove. They find their way back to where they belong. His free hand rose to cup her cheek, and she couldn't find the strength to pull away. You belong with me. You always have. I belong nowhere, Evangeline said, but her voice lacked conviction. I'm the shadow sister, the forgotten daughter. Rosalind is the heir, the beauty, the one worthy of. Rosalind is a pale imitation of something perfect, Darius said, his thumb tracing the curve of her cheekbone. Beautiful, yes. Accomplished, certainly. But she doesn't have your fire, Evangeline. She doesn't have your courage or your stubborn defiance or the way your eyes light up when you're angry. How would you know what my eyes look like when I'm angry? His smile was sharp and knowing. Because you're angry now. Furious, in fact. At me for pursuing you, at yourself for wanting to be pursued, at fate for putting you in an impossible situation. His thumb moved to trace her lower lip, and she couldn't suppress a shiver. Your eyes turn from brown to gold when you're passionate about something. They did it 3 centuries ago, and they're doing it now. She was drowning in his proximity and the impossible familiarity of his touch. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but a deeper part of her soul whispered that she was finally home. This is impossible, she breathed. Most of the best things are. He leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing her ear. Do you remember how you died, little dove? The question hit her like ice water. I'm not dead. Not now. But then? Do you remember? Images flashed through her mind unbidden. A crystal goblet filled with dark wine, the taste of bitter almonds, Darius's face contorting with rage as she collapsed in his arms. Poison, she whispered. Belladonna and wolfsbane, mixed with just enough hemlock to ensure a swift end. His voice was rough with old pain. You chose death rather than watch me marry Lady Catherine Worthington. Lady Catherine. The name triggered another cascade of memories. A blonde woman with cold blue eyes and a cruel smile. A political alliance that would have secured Darius's position but cost him everything that mattered. I broke that engagement the moment you breathed your last, Darius continued. Spent the next 3 centuries alone, searching for any trace of your soul. Until 3 days ago, when I walked into Ashworth Manor's rose garden and found you there, alive and whole and more beautiful than memory. But I'm not her, Evangeline said desperately. I can't be. I'm Evangeline Ashworth, born 21 years ago to Lord and Lady Ashworth. I have a birth record, a christening certificate, a lifetime of memories. Souls remember, little dove. Bodies are just the vessel. His lips brushed her temple, soft as butterfly wings. Tell me you don't feel it. Tell me you don't recognize the way my touch sets your blood on fire. Tell me you don't dream of dancing with me under stars that died before this century began. She couldn't. God help her, she couldn't tell him any of those things, because they were all true. Every cell in her body sang in recognition when he touched her. Every breath felt like coming back to life. You married Rosalind, she said again, as if repetition could make the reality less devastating. A mistake I intend to correct. You can't simply annul a vampire marriage. The blood bond can be transferred. His eyes glittered with dangerous promise. With the right ritual, Under the right circumstances, the bond can pass from one person to another, especially when the original bond was made in error. Evangeline stared at him in horror. You would break my sister's heart for a fantasy? I would reclaim what was stolen from me by death itself. His hand slid to the back of her neck, fingers tangling in her dark hair. And I don't believe your sister's heart would break, little dove. I've seen the way she looks at young Lord Pemberton, the way she lights up when he enters a room. It was true. Rosalind had been in love with James Pemberton for years, but their father had refused the match in favor of the more politically advantageous vampire alliance. She'll be ruined, Evangeline protested weakly. She'll be free to marry where her heart leads, with a generous settlement to ensure her comfort. Darius's grip tightened slightly, not painful, but possessive. And you'll be where you belong, in my arms, in my bed, in my eternity. And if I refuse, then I'll honor my marriage vows to your sister and spend the rest of my considerable existence making both our lives a misery. His smile was sharp as a blade. I'm not a good man, Evangeline. I've never pretended to be. I'm a creature of darkness and hunger and endless need. But I am yours, completely and irrevocably. I have been for 3 centuries. The sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the cathedral. The wedding party was returning, likely searching for the missing groom. Choose, Darius said urgently. Stay hidden in the shadows, playing the forgotten sister while your soul withers from loneliness. Or take my hand and claim the destiny that was stolen from you by death itself. Darius? Rosalind's voice carried across the cathedral, high and sweet and edged with concern. Where are you, my love? The endearment hit Evangeline like a physical blow. My love! Her sister was already falling into the role of devoted wife, not knowing that her husband's heart belonged to another. I need time, Evangeline whispered. Time is a luxury we don't have. Darius stepped back, but his eyes never left her face. The bonding must be completed within 7 days of the wedding, or it becomes permanent and unbreakable. After that, not even death could part your sister and me. 7 days. Meet me tomorrow night, he continued. The old oak grove beyond the eastern wall, where we used to meet before. You remember the place. She did remember. Not just the location, but the feeling of running through moonlit gardens to reach his arms. The way he would catch her and spin her around until she was dizzy with laughter. The way he would kiss her breathless against the ancient bark of trees that had witnessed centuries of love and loss. Darius! Rosalind's voice was closer now, tinged with worry. Tomorrow night, he repeated, his voice barely a whisper. Decide whether you're brave enough to claim the love that transcends death itself. With that, he melted back into the shadows with supernatural grace, reappearing beside his bride before Evangeline could blink. She watched from her hiding place as he took Rosalind's arm with practiced courtesy, murmuring some excuse about checking the security of the cathedral. Rosalind smiled up at him with trusting eyes, and Evangeline's heart shattered all over again. She remained hidden until the cathedral emptied, until the last vampire guest had departed and the last candle had been extinguished. Only then did she emerge from her alcove and make her way through the abandoned nave toward the doors. The night air hit her face like a blessing, cool and clean after the oppressive atmosphere of the cathedral. She walked slowly through the manor's grounds, her mind reeling with everything Darius had revealed. Impossible. It was all impossible. But as she passed through the rose garden where she spent most of her days, she could swear she heard the echo of laughter on the wind. Her own laughter, bright and joyous and centuries out of time. By the time she reached her chamber, dawn was breaking over the horizon. She dismissed her maid with a word and stood at her window, watching the sun chase away the shadows that had hidden so many secrets. On her nightstand lay a single red rose that hadn't been there when she left for the wedding. Attached to the stem was a small card bearing a single line in elegant script. "Until tomorrow night, my eternal love." Evangeline sank into her chair, the rose trembling in her shaking hands. The scent of it filled her senses, not just the perfume of the bloom, but something deeper, something that smelled like moonlight and promises and a love that had defied death itself. She had a choice to make. 7 days to decide between the life she had always known and a destiny that seemed too extraordinary to be real. But as she pressed the rose to her lips, she could taste the truth in its petals. Some bonds were stronger than death. Some love transcended the boundaries of time and flesh and mortality. And some souls were simply meant to find their way back to each other, no matter how many lifetimes it took. The question now was whether she was brave enough to trust in the impossible. The wedding breakfast was an exercise in sophisticated torture. Evangeline sat at the far end of the long table in Ashworth Manor's grand dining room, watching her sister glow with happiness beside her new husband. Rosalind looked every inch the radiant bride, in her morning dress of pale blue silk, her golden hair artfully arranged, her laugh musical as she responded to the congratulations of their guests. Darius played his part to perfection, the attentive groom, solicitous of his bride's comfort, charming to the assembled nobility. But Evangeline caught the way his gaze found her between courses, the way his fingers drummed restlessly against his wineglass when she wasn't looking at him. "You're unusually quiet this morning, Evangeline," her father observed from his place at the head of the table. Lord Ashworth was a distinguished man in his 50s, his once dark hair now silver at the temples, his blue eyes sharp with intelligence and ambition. "I trust you're not feeling unwell?" "Just tired, father." Evangeline forced a smile and lifted her teacup with steady hands. "It was rather a late night." "Indeed." Lady Ashworth's voice carried the faintest note of disapproval. Evangeline's mother was a handsome woman who had passed her beauty to Rosalind and her stubborn spirit to both her daughters, though she'd never quite known what to make of her younger child. "Though I don't recall seeing you at the reception." "I retired early," Evangeline said smoothly. "I thought it best to leave the celebration to the happy couple and their honored guests." From across the table, Darius' eyes met hers, and she saw a flash of something that might have been admiration or hunger. With him, it was difficult to tell the difference. "How considerate," he said, his voice warm with apparent approval. "Though your presence was missed, I assure you. Wasn't it, my dear?" He turned to Rosalind with a smile that looked genuine to everyone else, but felt like a knife in Evangeline's chest. "Of course," Rosalind agreed, reaching over to squeeze Evangeline's hand. "You should have danced, Evie. Lord Pemberton asked after you several times." Evangeline's heart clenched at the genuine affection in her sister's voice. Rosalind had always been kind to her, always included her when she could have easily ignored the shadow sister. The fact that she was now married to the man who haunted Evangeline's dreams felt like a cosmic joke of the cruelest variety. "Lord Pemberton is very kind," Evangeline replied carefully, avoiding Darius' gaze. "I hope you both had a pleasant evening." "Magical," Rosalind sighed happily, "though I confess I was rather overwhelmed by it all. So many people, so many traditions I'd never heard of. Darius was wonderfully patient with my ignorance of vampire customs. There will be plenty of time to learn, Darius said, and Evangeline caught the double meaning in his words. We have eternity, after all. The conversation continued around her, but Evangeline found herself retreating into her own thoughts. She studied her sister's face, looking for any sign that Rosalind suspected her new husband's divided loyalties. But Rosalind seemed genuinely happy, chattering about their planned honeymoon to the continent and her excitement about seeing Paris. Though I must confess, Rosalind said, her voice dropping to a more intimate tone, I'm rather nervous about traveling so far from home. I've never been beyond England's borders. You'll love it, Lady Catherine Worthington interjected from her place near the center of the table. Evangeline's blood chilled at the name. This was the woman Darius had been meant to marry 3 centuries ago, the woman whose engagement had driven her previous incarnation to suicide. Lady Catherine was still strikingly beautiful, despite being well into middle age, her blonde hair artfully styled, her figure maintained through careful corsetry and an iron will. But there was something cold about her, something calculating that made Evangeline's skin crawl. Paris is delightful in autumn, Catherine continued, though I imagine Lord Blackthorn will show you sights far more interesting than anything us mere mortals might enjoy. The emphasis on mortals was slight but unmistakable. It was a reminder that Rosalind was human, that she was temporary in a way that her immortal husband was not. I look forward to showing my wife the world, Darius said smoothly. There are many wonders she has yet to experience. Again, his eyes found Evangeline's, and she had to look away before she betrayed herself completely. The breakfast continued for what felt like hours, a parade of well wishes and political maneuvering disguised as social pleasantries. Evangeline endured it all with practiced grace, playing the role of the dutiful sister, while her heart slowly broke into smaller and smaller pieces. Finally, mercifully, the guests began to depart. Evangeline rose to help with the farewells, but her father caught her arm. "A word, if you please," Lord Ashworth said quietly. "In my study." Evangeline's stomach dropped, but she nodded and followed him from the dining room. Her father's study was a masculine sanctuary of dark wood and leather, the walls lined with books and hunting trophies. He closed the door behind them and gestured for her to sit in one of the chairs facing his massive desk. "I'll stand, thank you," she said, not trusting her shaking legs to support her if she tried to rise again. "As you wish." Her father moved behind his desk but didn't sit either. Instead, he leaned against its edge and studied her with those sharp blue eyes. "You seem troubled, my dear." "It's been an eventful evening and morning," Evangeline said carefully. "I suppose I'm still processing it all." "Indeed, your sister's marriage represents a significant change for our family." His tone was neutral, but she could hear the calculation beneath it. "Lord Blackthorn's alliance brings us considerable protection and influence within the supernatural community." "I'm glad Rosalind is happy," Evangeline said, which was both true and utterly inadequate. "Are you?" Her father's eyes sharpened. "Because from where I sat this morning, you looked like a woman attending a funeral rather than a wedding celebration." Heat flooded her cheeks. "I'm sorry if I seemed—" "You seemed heartbroken," he said bluntly, "which leads me to wonder if there's something I should know about your relationship with our new son-in-law." The words hit her like ice water. "I barely know Lord Blackthorn. We've exchanged perhaps a dozen words in the 3 days since his arrival." Her father's expression didn't change. Then perhaps you can explain why he spent the majority of breakfast staring at you rather than his bride." Evangeline's mouth went dry. "I'm sure you're mistaken. I'm many things, Evangeline, but unobservant is not one of them." He pushed off from the desk and began to pace, his hands clasped behind his back. "I've built my fortune and position by reading people, by understanding the currents of desire and power that move beneath polite society. And what I observed this morning was a man consumed by longing for something he cannot have. Father, the question," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, "is whether that longing is reciprocated." Evangeline lifted her chin, calling on every ounce of dignity she possessed. "If you're asking whether I have inappropriate feelings for my sister's husband, the answer is no. I would never." "Never what? Never fall in love with a man who was promised to your sister? Never allow yourself to want something that was never meant to be yours?" His laugh was harsh. "My dear girl, the heart rarely consults propriety before it chooses where to land its affections." She said nothing, afraid that any words would only damn her further. "I need to know, Evangeline," her father said, his voice gentling slightly. "If there is something between you and Blackthorn, if there has been some understanding or connection, I need to know now before it can damage our family's position." "There is nothing," she lied. "There has been nothing." He studied her for a long moment, and she had the uncomfortable feeling that he could see straight through her carefully constructed facade. "Very well," he said finally, "but I want you to be very careful in the coming days and weeks. Vampire marriages are sacred bonds, not easily broken. Even the appearance of impropriety could have serious consequences for all of us." "I understand. Do you?" He moved closer, his expression serious. "Because if Lord Blackthorn's affections are indeed misplaced, you could find yourself at the center of a supernatural conflict that would destroy not only you, but everyone you care about. Vampire justice is swift and merciless, particularly when it comes to matters of honor and fidelity." The warning was clear. Stay away from Darius or face the consequences. "I have no intention of interfering in Rosalind's marriage," Evangeline said, meaning every word. "Her happiness is more important to me than anything else." "I hope that's true." Her father's smile was sad. "Because I fear the alternative would cost us far more than we could afford to pay." He dismissed her with a nod, and Evangeline fled the study with as much dignity as she could muster. But as she climbed the stairs to her chamber, his words echoed in her mind. "Vampire justice is swift and merciless." She'd always known that her attraction to Darius was dangerous, but she'd thought the danger was to her heart, not her life. The reminder that she was dealing with creatures who operated by entirely different rules sent a chill through her blood. In her chamber, she found her maid waiting with a knowing smile and a silver tray. "This arrived for you, miss," Mary said, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Hand-delivered by one of his lordship's servants." On the tray lay a single envelope made of heavy paper and sealed with black wax. Evangeline's name was written across the front in the same elegant script she'd seen on the roses card. Her hands trembled as she broke the seal and unfolded the letter within. "My dearest Evangeline," it began, "I trust you slept well, though I suspect your dreams were as restless as mine. I find myself counting the hours until tonight, when we can speak freely of all that lies between us. The oak grove remembers us, as do the stars that witnessed our first declarations of love. Come to me at midnight, and we will discuss the future that awaits us both. Until then, I remain your most devoted servant, D. Below his initial was a postscript that made her heart stop. If you doubt the truth of what I've told you, look beneath the loose stone in the garden wall, third from the eastern gate. Some gifts transcend death itself. Evangeline crumpled the letter in her fist, but she couldn't crush the hope that bloomed in her chest. Despite every rational thought, despite her father's warnings and her sister's happiness, she wanted desperately to believe that what Darius claimed was possible. "Will there be a reply, miss?" Mary asked. "No," Evangeline said quickly. "No reply." But even as she spoke the words, she knew she would go to him. Tonight, at midnight, she would walk through the moonlit gardens to the ancient oak grove and listen to whatever impossible truths he had to share. Because some hungers were stronger than fear. Some needs transcended the boundaries of wisdom and propriety and common sense. And some souls, it seemed, would always find their way back to each other, no matter how many obstacles stood in their path. As afternoon faded to evening, Evangeline found herself in the garden despite every intention to stay in her chamber. The loose stone in the wall was exactly where Darius had indicated, and her hands shook as she pried it free. Hidden in the small cavity behind it was a wooden box, old and worn smooth by time. Inside, wrapped in faded silk, was a miniature portrait of a young woman with dark hair and familiar brown eyes. The woman was beautiful, but it was more than that. She was identical to Evangeline in every detail, from the curve of her lips to the small scar above her left eyebrow that Evangeline had carried since childhood. Beneath the portrait was a lock of dark hair tied with a ribbon that had once been white but had faded to ivory with age. And beneath that, most impossible of all, was a ring, a delicate band of silver set with a small ruby that caught the late afternoon light like captured fire. Evangeline lifted the ring with trembling fingers, and the moment it touched her skin, memories flooded through her like a dam bursting. Dancing in moonlit gardens with a man whose touch set her blood on fire. Stolen kisses in shadowed alcoves while the world slept around them. Whispered promises of eternity and love that transcended death itself. And then, darker memories. The taste of poison on her tongue, the way Darius's face contorted with anguish as she collapsed in his arms, the feeling of life ebbing away while he begged her to stay, pleaded with her to fight. "I'll find you," he'd whispered as darkness closed around her. "In this life or the next, I'll find you. I swear it on my soul." Evangeline sank to her knees in the garden dirt, the ring clutched to her chest as centuries of buried memories crashed over her. She remembered everything now. Their secret courtship, the political machinations that had forced their separation, the desperate choice she'd made rather than watch him marry another. But she also remembered something else, something that changed everything. She remembered that she'd been pregnant when she died. The revelation hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and sending shockwaves through her entire being. She'd been carrying Darius's child, their child, when she'd chosen poison over living without him. The child who had never been born in that life had been born in this one, reincarnated along with her mother's soul. Which meant, "Oh God," she whispered, the truth finally clear. Which meant she wasn't just Evangeline Ashworth, the forgotten second daughter. She was also Lady Catherine Blackthorne, returned from death to reclaim the love that had been stolen from her. And the man waiting for her in the oak grove wasn't just Darius Blackthorne, the dangerous vampire who had married her sister. He was the father of her soul, the other half of a bond that not even death had been able to break. As darkness fell over Ashworth Manor, Evangeline rose from the garden on unsteady legs and walked toward the destiny that had been 3 centuries in the making. The oak grove lay beyond the eastern wall of Ashworth Manor's grounds, a sacred place where ancient trees had stood sentinel for longer than human memory. Evangeline had played there as a child, drawn by something she couldn't name, never knowing that she walked in the footsteps of another life. Now, as she made her way through the moonlit darkness, every step felt like coming home. Darius was waiting for her in the center of the grove, standing beneath the largest oak with his dark hair loose around his shoulders. He'd changed from his formal wedding attire into a simple white shirt and dark breeches, looking more like the man from her recovered memories than the aristocratic vampire lord who had married her sister that morning. "You came," he said, simply. "I found the box." Evangeline held up the miniature portrait, her hand shaking in the silvery light. "I remember everything now." The relief that crossed his face was profound, transforming his aristocratic features into something almost human. "Catherine," he breathed. "My name is Evangeline," she corrected, though gently. "Catherine died 3 centuries ago. I may carry her memories, her soul, but I am not her. I am myself, with my own life and choices and regrets." He nodded slowly. "Forgive me. You're right, of course. You are Evangeline Ashworth, and I have no right to claim you based on a love from another lifetime." "Don't you?" She moved closer, drawn by an invisible thread that seemed to connect her heart to his. "Because I remember loving you, Darius. I remember choosing death rather than watching you marry another. And I remember." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I remember carrying your child." His entire body went rigid. "What?" "I was pregnant when I died. Only a few weeks along, not enough to show, but I knew." Tears spilled down her cheeks as the full weight of that lost life hit her. "I killed not just myself, but our child, our baby, who never had a chance to live or love or choose for themselves." "Sweet Christ," Darius whispered, sinking against the tree trunk as if his legs could no longer support him. "I never knew. You never told me." "I was going to. That night, when I came to tell you about the baby, I found you with the marriage contracts already signed. Lady Catherine's family had threatened war if you didn't honor the engagement, and you had chosen duty over love." She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I couldn't bear to trap you with news of a child when you'd already sacrificed so much for peace." "You should have told me," he said hoarsely. "I would have found another way. I would have started a war that would have killed thousands, broken treaties that kept the supernatural world stable." Evangeline shook her head. "You were the alpha, Darius. Your responsibilities were greater than our personal happiness." "And yet here we are," he said bitterly. 3 centuries later, and I've made the same choice again. Married for political alliance while my heart belongs elsewhere." "Not the same choice," Evangeline corrected. "This time, you knew I existed before you signed the contracts. This time, you had a choice." He was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the moonlight. "Are you angry with me?" "I should be." She moved closer, close enough to touch if she dared. "I should hate you for marrying my sister when you knew what lay between us. But I can't, because I understand why you did it." "Do you?" "You needed to see if what you felt was real." "You needed to know if I was truly Catherine reborn, or just a woman who happened to resemble her." Evangeline smiled sadly. And perhaps you needed to punish yourself a little for not saving me the first time." His laugh was bitter. "You always could read me too well. It's a gift that apparently transcends death." She reached out slowly, giving him time to pull away, and cupped his face in her hands. His skin was cool as marble, but warmed under her touch. "But I also understand something else now, something that changes everything." "What?" "The child I lost, our child, they weren't truly lost." Her voice grew stronger, more certain. "They were reborn too, just as I was. The soul that never had a chance to live that life found a way into this one." "What?" "The child I lost, our child, they weren't truly lost." Her voice grew stronger, more certain. "They were reborn too, just as I was. The soul that never had a chance to live that life found a way into this one." Understanding dawned in his silver-shot eyes. "You think you're—" "I don't think. I know." She pressed her hand to her stomach, where she'd felt a strange fluttering for weeks that she'd dismissed as nerves. "Our child found a way back to us, Darius. They're here, now, growing inside me just as they were 3 centuries ago." He stared at her in wonder and disbelief. "That's impossible. You're not married. You haven't been with anyone." "Haven't I?" She smiled through her tears. "I dream of you every night, Darius. I dream of your touch, your kiss, your body moving against mine. What if those aren't just dreams? What if our souls have been finding ways to touch across the barriers of death and time?" "Soul conception," he breathed. "It's a myth, a legend told among the oldest vampires. Is it? Or is it what happens when love is strong enough to transcend the boundaries of mortality?" She took his hands and placed them on her still flat stomach. "Feel for yourself. Reach out with your senses and tell me what you find." He closed his eyes, his supernatural senses extending beyond the physical world. When he opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "A heartbeat," he whispered. Faint but steady, growing stronger by the day. His hands trembled against her. "Our child, she confirmed. "The baby who died with me has found a way back to us. Which means this isn't just about correcting the mistakes of the past, it's about claiming the future that was stolen from us." Evangeline. Her name was a prayer on his lips. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that some bonds are stronger than death, stronger than time, stronger than the petty concerns of politics and propriety." She stepped closer until their bodies were almost touching. "I'm saying that our souls have spent 3 centuries fighting their way back to each other, and I'm tired of fighting fate." "And your sister? The marriage vows I spoke this morning?" Pain flickered through her, sharp and real. "Will break her heart, at least initially. But Rosalind deserves to be loved for herself, not used as a substitute for another woman. And James Pemberton deserves a chance to win the heart that's already half his. The scandal will destroy your family's reputation." "Let it." Her voice was fierce, certain. "I've lived my entire life in the shadows, being the good daughter, the quiet one, the one who never caused trouble. I died once for duty and propriety, Darius. I won't do it again. The vampire courts will demand justice for the broken bond. Then we'll face them together." She reached up and traced the strong line of his jaw. "I'm not the frightened girl I was 3 centuries ago. I've had 21 years to grow stronger, braver, more certain of what I want. And what I want is you, our love, our child, our eternity. The risks are worth taking." She silenced his protests with a kiss, pouring 3 centuries of longing into the press of her lips against his. He resisted for only a moment before his arms came around her, crushing her against his chest as if he could absorb her into his very being. The kiss was everything she remembered and more. Fire and ice, passion and tenderness, the collision of two souls recognizing their perfect match. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I loved you then, I love you now, and I will love you for every lifetime to come." "And I love you," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "More than honor, more than duty, more than my own existence. You are my heart, Evangeline. You always have been." "Then stop fighting it," she smiled up at him, radiant in the moonlight. "Stop trying to be noble and good and self-sacrificing. Be selfish for once. Take what you want." "What I want," he said slowly, "is everything. Your love, your trust, your body, your soul, your days and nights and all the years between. I want to wake up beside you for the rest of eternity and know that you chose me, not duty or politics or family expectations, but me." "Then you shall have it." She kissed him again, softer this time, but no less intense. "All of it and more. But first, we need to deal with the small matter of your current wife." Darius groaned against her lips. "Rosalind. God, what a mess I've made of everything." "Well, unmake it," Evangeline said firmly. "Together. But it has to be done carefully, with as little pain to her as possible." "The transfer ritual requires both parties to consent freely," Darius said slowly, his mind already working through the logistics. "Rosalind would have to agree to release me from our bond and transfer it to you." "She will," Evangeline's voice was confident. "When she understands the truth, all of it, she'll agree. Rosalind has a generous heart, and she wants to be loved truly, not used as a substitute." "And if she doesn't, then we'll find another way." Evangeline's jaw set with determination. "I didn't fight my way back from death to give up now." Our child deserves to be born to parents who chose each other freely, and our love deserves a chance to flourish in the light instead of hiding in shadows. Darius cupped her face in his hands, studying her as if memorizing every feature. "You're magnificent," he said softly. "Fierce and brave and absolutely magnificent. How did I ever survive 3 centuries without you?" "You didn't, really," she pointed out with a small smile. "You existed, but you didn't live. Neither of us did. But that changes now." "Now," he agreed, and sealed the promise with another kiss. They spent the rest of the night in the grove, talking and touching and planning their impossible future. As dawn approached, they reluctantly parted, but not before Darius had slipped the ruby ring onto Evangeline's finger where it belonged. "Tomorrow night," he said, kissing her hand where the ring gleamed like captured starlight. "We'll speak to Rosalind together." "Together," Evangeline agreed, her heart full of hope for the first time in any of her lifetimes. As she walked back to the manor, she felt the flutter in her stomach again, stronger now, more insistent. Their child, fighting to live, to claim the future that had been denied them before. This time, she would not let fear or duty or the expectations of others steal what was rightfully theirs. This time, love would triumph over death itself. The confrontation with Rosalind came sooner than expected. Evangeline had barely returned to her chamber when she found her sister waiting there, still dressed in her wedding nightgown and wrapper, her golden hair loose around her shoulders. But instead of the glowing happiness of a new bride, Rosalind's face was streaked with tears. "Evie," she said, rising from the chair by the window where she'd apparently been waiting for hours. "Thank God you're back. I need to talk to you."
"Of course," Evangeline said carefully, slipping the ruby ring off her finger and into her pocket.
"What's wrong? Are you unwell?" "I'm terrified," Rosalind confessed, wrapping her arms around herself. "And confused, and, oh, Evie, I think I've made the most terrible mistake." Evangeline's heart clenched with sympathy and guilt in equal measure. "What do you mean?" "My husband," Rosalind said, the word coming out like something bitter. He doesn't want me. Not really. When we retired to his chambers tonight, he was perfectly polite, perfectly gentle, but I could tell his heart wasn't in it. He looked at me like I was a stranger wearing the face of someone he loved. Rosalind. And then, when I asked him about it, he said something strange." Rosalind moved to the window, staring out at the gardens where dawn was breaking. "He said I reminded him of someone he'd lost long ago, someone who could never be replaced. He said he would try to be a good husband to me, but that I deserved to know his heart belonged to a ghost." The words hit Evangeline like physical blows. Even in his guilt, Darius couldn't bring himself to lie completely to her innocent sister. "Oh, Rosie," Evangeline whispered. "There's more." Rosalind turned back to her, tears streaming down her face. "When I pressed him for details, he finally told me the truth. He said he'd loved a woman named Catherine Blackthorne 3 centuries ago, a woman who died rather than watch him marry another. He said he'd married me hoping to finally put her memory to rest, but seeing me only miss her more." Evangeline sank into a chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "What did you say?" "What could I say? I told him I understood, that I knew what it was like to love someone you couldn't have." Rosalind's laugh was bitter. "Because I do know, Evie. I've been in love with James Pemberton for 3 years, but Father would never allow the match. When Lord Blackthorne offered for my hand, I thought I could learn to love him, that affection might grow where passion couldn't bloom. And now? Now I realize I've trapped us both in a marriage neither of us wanted." Rosalind moved to kneel beside Evangeline's chair, taking her hands. "But that's not the strangest part. When he was telling me about this Catherine woman, describing her appearance, her mannerisms, the way she moved through the world, Evie, he was describing you." Evangeline's mouth went dry. "That's impossible." "Is it? You have the same dark hair, the same brown eyes that turn gold when you're passionate about something. You have the same way of tilting your head when you're thinking, the same habit of biting your lower lip when you're nervous." Rosalind's grip tightened on her hands. "And then there's the way he looks at you." "Rosalind, I'm not blind, Evie. I saw the way his eyes followed you during the wedding breakfast. I've seen the way you blush when he speaks to you, the way you can't quite meet his gaze. There's something between you two, something that goes deeper than mere attraction." Evangeline closed her eyes, knowing she couldn't lie anymore. "Yes," she whispered, "there is. I knew it." Rosalind's voice was sad but not angry. "Part of me has known since the moment he arrived at our house. He was polite to me, charming even. But when he looked at you, he came alive in a way that made me feel like I was witnessing something sacred." "I'm so sorry," Evangeline said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I never meant for this to happen. I tried to stay away from him, tried to be happy for you both." "Don't apologize for falling in love," Rosalind interrupted gently, "especially not when that love is clearly returned. The question is, what are we going to do about it?" Evangeline stared at her sister in amazement. "You're not angry?" "Oh, I'm furious," Rosalind said with a watery smile. "But not at you. I'm angry at Father for arranging this marriage without considering anyone's feelings. I'm angry at myself for agreeing to it when I knew my heart belonged elsewhere. And I'm angry at fate for being so cruel to all of us." Rosie, but I'm not angry at you for loving him or at him for loving you back. How could I be when I know what it's like to pine for someone you can't have? Rosalind squeezed her hands. The real question is whether you're brave enough to fight for what you want. What are you saying? I'm saying that vampire marriages can be dissolved under certain circumstances. If both parties agree that the match was made in error, if there are compelling reasons to believe the bond was formed under false pretenses, the courts can grant an annulment. Evangeline's heart began to race. You would do that? You would agree to end the marriage? In a heartbeat, Rosalind said firmly, if it means we could all be free to follow our hearts. James has been waiting for me for 3 years, Evie. If I could marry him instead, if you could have Lord Blackthorn, wouldn't that be better for everyone? The scandal will pass. It always does. Rosalind stood and began to pace, her mind clearly racing. We could say the marriage was never properly consummated due to incompatibility. That Lord Blackthorn realized he'd made an error and graciously agreed to release me so that both our families could pursue more suitable alliances. And you think that would work? With the right presentation, yes. Especially if Lord Blackthorn were to offer a generous settlement to our family as compensation for the inconvenience. Rosalind's eyes gleamed with sudden excitement. Father is practical above all else. If the financial terms are favorable enough, he'll agree to the annulment. And the vampire courts? Leave them to me, Rosalind said with surprising confidence. I'm new to supernatural politics, but I'm not naive. I've been studying vampire law since the engagement was announced, preparing myself to be a proper wife to a vampire lord. I know the precedents for marriage dissolution. Evangeline felt hope blooming in her chest like a flower finally seeing sunlight. You would really do this? Risk the scandal, the gossip, the potential damage to your reputation? For the chance to marry the man I love while freeing you to do the same, without hesitation. Rosalind knelt beside her again, taking her hands. We're sisters, Evie. We've always looked out for each other. This is just one more challenge to face together. There's something else, Evangeline said slowly. Something I need to tell you about Lord Blackthorn and me. What? Evangeline took a deep breath and told her everything. The memories, the past life, the child she now carried. Rosalind listened in wide-eyed amazement, occasionally asking for clarification, but never once expressing disbelief. Soul reincarnation, she breathed when Evangeline finished. I've read about it in the old texts, but I never imagined. And you're certain about the baby? As certain as I can be. It explains so much. Why I've always felt different. Why I was drawn to the places where Catherine used to walk. Why Darius recognized me. Evangeline placed a protective hand over her stomach. This child is the one we lost 3 centuries ago, fighting their way back to life. Then we have to act quickly, Rosalind said, her voice urgent. Vampire law is very specific about bloodlines and inheritance. If you're carrying Lord Blackthorn's child, his true heir, then your claim to his hand supersedes mine completely. What do you mean? A vampire's bond with the mother of their child is considered sacred, more binding than any marriage contract. If we can prove you're pregnant with his baby, the courts would have no choice but to grant the annulment and recognize you as his rightful mate. Evangeline stared at her sister in amazement. You really have been studying vampire law? I wanted to be prepared for any eventuality. Rosalind grinned suddenly, looking more like the mischievous girl she'd been as a child. I just never imagined the eventuality would be helping my sister steal my husband. Are you sure about this? Really, truly sure? Because once we start down this path, there's no going back. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Rosalind stood and moved to Evangeline's wardrobe, pulling out a practical day dress. Now, get dressed. We have a vampire lord to convince and a marriage to dissolve." As Evangeline changed clothes, she marveled at her sister's unexpected strength and wisdom. She'd always seen Rosalind as the sheltered, golden child, protected from the harsh realities of the world by her beauty and status. But beneath that lovely exterior was a core of steel that Evangeline was only now beginning to appreciate. "Rosie," she said as her sister helped her with the buttons, "thank you for understanding, for helping, for being you." "Thank me by being happy," Rosalind replied, kissing her cheek. "Both of you. You've been given a second chance at love that transcends death itself. Don't waste it." Together, the sisters made their way through the awakening manor toward the guest wing where Darius had spent his first and hopefully last night as Rosalind's husband. It was time to reclaim the future that belonged to them all. They found Darius in the library, fully dressed despite the early hour, standing before the tall windows that looked out over the rose garden. He turned as they entered, and Evangeline saw the exact moment when he registered their linked arms and determined expressions. "Lady Rosalind," he said carefully, inclining his head. "Evangeline, this is unexpected. We need to talk," Rosalind said without preamble, moving to close the library door behind them. "All of us, together, honestly." Darius's eyes found Evangeline's, and she saw both hope and wariness in their silver depths. "About what?" "About the fact that you're in love with my sister and she's in love with you, and I have no intention of standing in the way of that," Rosalind said bluntly. If she'd slapped him, Darius couldn't have looked more stunned. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me correctly." Rosalind moved to pour herself tea from the service that had been laid out on the side table, her movements calm and deliberate. "I know about Catherine, Darius. I know about your lost love and the way she died, and I know that Evangeline is her reincarnation." Rosalind told her everything, Evangeline said quietly when Darius continued to stare. "About last night, about the conversation you had, about why you married her when your heart belonged elsewhere." "I see." Darius moved to one of the leather chairs and sank into it, suddenly looking every one of his considerable years. "And what precisely do you plan to do with this information?" "Help you," Rosalind said simply, settling into the chair across from him with her teacup balanced perfectly in her hands. "Help both of you get what you want while freeing me to pursue what I want, which is James Pemberton's hand in marriage with my family's blessing and a dowry substantial enough to overcome his family's concerns about the political implications." Darius blinked. "You want to dissolve our marriage so you can marry someone else?" "I want to dissolve our marriage so we can all marry someone else," Rosalind corrected. "You get Evangeline, I get James, and everyone ends up happier than if we'd continued with this charade." "It's not that simple," Darius began, but Rosalind held up a hand to stop him. "Actually, it is. I've been researching vampire marriage law since our engagement was announced, and there are several precedents for dissolution in cases where the bond was formed under false pretenses, or where compelling circumstances make continuation impossible."